Hello and welcome to the episode 8 of the Developers End podcast. My name is Rainy, aka Siavash, and joining me is the co-host of the podcast, Sydney, aka Fem. I said
you
that
finally
the other way
got
around.
it.
Yeah, I finally got it.
You finally got it. Co-host, not joining me this week.
Not joining me
co-host.
this week or anything like that. Yes. Today we are going to go back to our How to Indie series, as I have dubbed.
Woohoo!
And this time we're going
indie.
to talk about how to get funding for your game, the mysterious land of paying yourself
Money.
and potentially people who work with you. Hopefully, if you're, if you want to pay them.
And if you're not insufferable and people can actually work with you.
Yeah.
That's something too.
I say that because I know some people work on volunteer status.
Yeah.
But it's, more than often it can get pretty iffy. So it's always best to just pay people and not have to deal with that. But yes, it's a pretty mysterious subject, I'd say. It's not a type of subject that you just Google and find. It's not like, how to do a material in Unreal and then you find a tutorial for it. It's not that kind of stuff. So we're going to try our best to give you a pretty nice handbook on how to get funding for your game. And
I'll do my best.
We will do our best. And Sydney was putting together the outline for this one, and I think she got the best question that we can start with, which is, before you can even think about how to get funding for your game, you need to think about how much it's going to cost you. Because if you go to a publisher or some sort of funding source, that's the first thing they're going to ask you. How much do you need? So if you want to take us through that.
I think it's hard for a lot of people to figure out because... actually, you know what? This is something I've always wondered. When you were putting, the Kickstarter together for SunnySide, how did you decide how much it was going to cost?
Well, back when SunnySide was just a solo project and it was going to stay a solo project, back then I had Matt with me. So he was on percentage. So, and he was okay with not being paid. He was like, okay, I'm just going to take the percentage at the end of it. So I pretty much calculated how long I need to work on it and how much is it going to cost me every month to keep myself fed and pay rent and keep the lights on. And that was it.
And that's pretty much the answer, really, is if it's a solo project, what is it going to cost you to pay your bills? Like that's what it is. And to keep your and you don't want to overdo it. You don't want to, what's it going to cost for me to order in for every single meal for the next year? Okay, now there's, at the end of the day, at the beginning of the day, you need to think about the fact that people are giving you money. Whether it's whatever route you take, you are taking somebody else's money and you need to honor that. So you don't want to be greedy, right? So, but yeah, that's kind of the first thing is if it's a solo development project, which if this is your first game, let's be honest, it probably should be. Or, if you want to pay for an artist or things like that. So there's a lot of research involved. You can't just sit down and arbitrarily decide. You need to figure out what your bills are for a month. You need to figure out if you do want to hire other people, let's say you want to hire an artist or musician or something, what is it going to cost to hire them? And can you have it so they work for free and they just get royalties on the back end? Absolutely. That's a pretty common way to do it. But something you need to think about is that going to help you in the long run? And what are your goals? So there's a lot of questions you need to answer. So,
and also, every decision you make brings its own challenges to the table. So let's say you're not going to pay the people. Well, you need to make sure that they're stable enough that they're going to be able to stick around. Because if you promise them a percentage, but there's no incentive for them to stay, or they can't stay and they leave, you still need to pay them that percentage at the end of the day, even though they're not going to work on anything. Yeah. So there's so much to consider on that.
You also just need to think about, is this a one-time deal? Do you just want to make this one game and continue on? In which case, giving them percentage at the end, not a big deal. Is this a kickoff point to start a full business? If it is, then you need to be thinking about where all those royalties at the end are going to go. So if you're making a tiny game and you're charging $5 for it, and you've given away royalty share to 5 people that you're working with, and everybody's getting 15%, well, how much is going to be left for you to continue building the next game? So you need to think about how much you're giving away, not of just the game itself, but are you giving away pieces of the company? That's something that a lot of people don't think about. So I'll get into that when we talk about other things. But you need to really...
is that a game will continue to sell for years to come. As long as it's out there in the store, it is most likely going to sell something. And if you had royalty share, and if there was no time limit on it, then you need to be splitting that work and that
long
money
time
as you go, and that essentially you're pretty much creating an accounting work for yourself for as many years as you're gonna have to do it.
So step one, figure out, what's it gonna cost. And as with everything, I kind of say start small and get your experience first. Don't learn all the hard lessons first. Learn slowly unless you want to be stressed and tired and out of your mind all the time. So go easy on yourself and start small. Okay, let's say I want to take 3 months to make a small little game, and my monthly spend is $1,000 on the stuff that I need to pay for. Let's be realistic, $2,000 the stuff that I need to pay for. So it's a $6,000 game. So you need to raise $6,000. I always suggest putting on some kind of a buffer in case something goes wrong. If your chair breaks, if your graphics card goes kaput, if something happens, you want to have a little bit of wiggle room. So that's going to be different for everybody and what you're comfortable with. You could say do a percentage. I'm sure there's somebody out there who has good advice on that, on like what the percentage needs to be. Me personally, I feel good with about $1,000 extra, just kind of hanging out. So that's me. That's how I like to do it. The bigger your budget gets, you might need to expand that a little bit more. But $1,000 or a month of work,
an extra month of work. That's another
an extra month. To kind of padding, or because we're in tech, it needs to be a little bit higher because our equipment is more expensive. So there's a lot of little things, but so figure out what it's going to cost you and then add a little bit of padding. And then that's what you need to find, right? So you've got that, you've got your, what do I need in order to get this done? And, your salary for you, it could be, there's a lot of stuff to consider too for like just running the business. So there is, what it costs you to, stay alive. But then there's also like, what programs do you need to buy to make a game? Do you need to have an Adobe account? Do you need to have some kind of Kanban board subscription that helps you keep everything on track? Do you need to, whatever. Purchase assets. Yeah. Do you need, if you don't hire artists? So there's a lot of things to consider. Is your equipment good enough? You need to think about, the needs of, like you said, the other people. So you have to sit down and do all that research first. That's kind of the first step. And probably one of the longest processes. So it's kind of a two-part thing. You want to figure out what it's going to cost. You also need to figure out how long you think it's going to take you. And that kind of goes in with it. So if I think it's going to take me 3 months, and I figured out we need $2,000 a month to get this game, we think it's going to take 3 months. Plan for 6. And ask for 6. And work towards 6. Because it's never going to be as short as you think it's going to be. So let's say it's $2,000 a month. We thought it was going to be 3 months, and we put on the $1,000 padding. That's $7,000, right? Well, now we need to plan for another 3 just in case. So now we're looking at $14,000. So your $6,000 game, double it.
Yeah.
Because you don't know what's going to happen. Now, once you start getting bigger, I don't suggest doubling it. If you're thinking it's going to take you 2 years, don't add another year. But just be aware of the things that might come up and give yourself that wiggle room, because the smaller and tighter your budget, the harder it's going to be.
And I speak for experience when I say that there will always be stuff that will come up. You will almost never have a smooth road to the end. There will always be bumps along it. And better prepare for them than
Yeah,
to be surprised.
absolutely, yeah. So, okay, so let's say we're making a game that we think is going to take 3 months. We're going to ask for 6 months, and we're going to ask for $14,000, just to be safe, okay? Now, the question is, where are we going to get that $14,000? And that's really the heart of it, is where do you get the money from? So, for you, you went to Kickstarter.
Yeah.
Because, let's be honest, it's the easiest.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing is, these days it's a lot more difficult.
Yeah.
Back when I did the Kickstarter, there weren't as much, I guess, baggage with it. Kickstarter has rightfully gotten a lot stricter with their laws and rules and everything because of how many scammers were around and decided to just never deliver on projects.
Take the money and run.
Yeah, so it's a bit more strict these days, but it is still a pretty good avenue. But there is a few things that you need to kind of consider, and this is kind of going to be a continuation of our speech about how to what was the other
we don't
one?
need to get too into it.
We don't need to get too into it. No.
Yeah, mostly the point of it is that crowdfunding comes with not risks of getting the money, but risks of who and what you're beholden to when you're done with it.
That's the thing. Yeah.
There is a cost, and the heart of the lesson is no matter where you get the money, with I think one exception, there's going to be a cost associated with it. You're going to have to give something, and what you give with Kickstarter is flexibility, really, because you're going to now have these 100,000, 2,000, 10,000, whatever people who now have a say in what you do because you made a promise, which is fair. It's totally fair, but something to be aware of. So, and
you just need to be aware of it, because at the same time it can be very fun, because the thing about Kickstarter is that you're not just building funding for your game, you're also kind of building a bit of an audience. So you're going to have people from the start that are going to cheer you on, and that is going to be pretty important, actually, believe it or not. Unless you're a Buddhist that is just completely in self-satisfaction with themselves, you most likely are going to get some sort of kind of feedback from people who, hopefully positive, who back the game, that is going to push you forward to want to do more. So it also comes with that positive, but at the same time, if you ever want going to be making any changes that are going to be big,
it's harder.
You need to make that a very clear discussion for everybody, and you most likely need to involve everyone in that decision. For example, just to kind of continue on the funding, like how I decided to how much SunnySide is going to cost. Pretty much right after the Kickstarter was successful, obviously I sat down and started to plan on how I'm going to approach this whole thing. And at that point, I also opened back a kit for continuation of the funding for a few more months. By the way, we could talk about that a little bit more, but not right now. It's just to extend your Kickstarter campaign, essentially, give people more time to fund the project. But as soon as I saw that more money came through back a kit, and I started to look through maybe hiring an artist, I got this kind of suggestion from Alan that we are going to need a 2D artist to do this right. And at the same time, more funding was coming through back a kit. So what I did is that I opened the question to the community. Ask them, hey, should we up the quality? Look at these portraits, we can do these. Look at these art style, we can do this. And if you're happy with this, we can go ahead with this, which is going to kind of change how we're going to approach the game. The funding isn't going to be enough anymore, so whatever money you've given us is going to go into help us find a publisher. But at the same time, that means that we can up the quality. And then the voting ended up being go for the quality, which is then what we decided to do.
Yeah, and that's the crowdfunding aspect of it. Yeah. So, but there are lots of different crowd funds. There's Kickstarter, there's Indiegogo, there's, I don't know, a bunch of other ones I've probably never even heard of. So, and they all have their own little things and ways of doing it. But what the thing to really be aware of is once you do crowdfunding, you're beholden to the crowd. Which isn't bad, but it's just that you need to be aware of it. Yeah, don't forget the crowd and crowdfunding. So there's other avenues, though. There's a ton of other avenues and ways to do it. There's private investing. So there's just having people who believe in you, who have the money, who are willing to give it to you in exchange for something. They're either going to want a piece of your company, or they're going to want royalties off of the game, or they're going to want something in exchange. They're usually going to want some kind of return.
Process. Yeah.
Sometimes they want some kind of creative say. So there's private funding, and that's a million different things. There are whole investment groups that work with the game developers, and that's what they like to invest in. So you can always go to one of them and see if you can get funding from that. Wings is one of that. They are a private investment group that funds women-led games. That's what they like to fund. And so if they believe in you and your project, they will give you money to make it. They're not a publisher, they're just an investment group. There are also things like angel investors, which I guess you had never heard of.
I had never heard of that. So what does that mean?
Angel investors are the one type of investment where they're not going to want anything in return. These are genuinely altruistic people who believe in you and just want to give you money and don't want anything for it. And they exist, and it happens, and it's rare. If you can find somebody, I mean, that's a great way to go. And there are a lot of stories about it happening in games. And the problem with angel investment often is that the developer is the one who screws it up.
Yeah.
Usually. So they either take the money and run, or they don't fulfill what small terms there are or something, and it goes wrong. So if you are lucky enough to get an angel investor, don't screw it up, man. Like, that is the world giving you a silver platter full of food to feed you for the rest of your life, and you throwing it in the trash. So
and
don't be one of those guys.
At the end of it, send them our way. You can see.
Yeah, we'll take them. So those are, investors. There's
also government ones. I don't know if you were going to get into that, but
that would, I wasn't. That's kind of more, I guess it would be private public funding. I don't know a lot about it because I live in the United States, and we don't care about that. But if you're lucky enough to live somewhere like Sweden or in other parts of the EU, there are government grants or loans, or I think it's just one of those two things, where you can get money from the government to pursue artistic endeavors. So,
and those usually come with even more support, from what I've heard.
Yeah.
For example, in Sweden, you can get what do you call them? You can get somewhere to sleep and stay, and with food and everything. If you're a game
they'll
dev.
give you they'll give you access to lawyers and to coaches and so it's almost like going to school, kind of, but not having to pay for it, which my American mind cannot wrap my head around. So if you don't live in the United States, or if you would like to not live in the United States and move to somewhere that has one of those, go to Europe, and maybe they'll help you out, and maybe they'll have something for you. I can't speak towards that though, but it definitely exists. We know that it exists. The next route is publishers. So publishers come in a lot of different flavors, and that's the first thing to be aware of, is that every publisher wants something different, and they're going to give something different, and they don't all work the same way. So there are publishers who are willing to just give you money for a cut, and they'll give you support, and everybody's happy. There are publishers that really just want to do the marketing aspect for it, and will help introduce you to people and might not even give you funding. There are some publishers who will give you the funding, but they're going to want some kind of ownership, either over your IP or over your studio, or they might want to own the whole studio. We've seen that happen a lot recently, where they just buy up the whole company. So that's a whole other topic that I'd like to discuss one day, which is just defending your own IP. There are publishers who focus on like physical releases. So you need to decide if that's important to you. That was something that was important to Rainy and I, is we really wanted to be able to walk into a GameStop and purchase a physical copy of our game. So those are the types of publishers we looked for, but not every publisher offers that. And we're in a weird place right now in the industry where we're kind of deciding if that's something that people are even going to keep doing. Are we going to keep doing physical, or are we moving away from it? Or there's a lot of people haven't quite decided what the future of physical publishing looks like.
Yeah, and it is really kind of down to how the biggest companies that are creating these consoles are going to go ahead with their consoles. There's news on the horizon that the next Xbox consoles might not have a disc tray at all.
Yeah. But there's also news that is a complete lie.
Exactly.
So we have no idea what's going on.
Just be aware of it more so.
Yeah. So, but if it's something that's important to you, like it was important to us, then that's the type of publisher you want to look for. So when it comes to the most important thing that I can say when it comes to finding a publisher is you are shopping. You are shopping for a publisher. It is not about who can I convince to give me money for my game. It's who is out there that I'm willing to work with and that I think is going to work well with us and what we want to do. And it is very possible that you will not find a publisher, not because they don't want you, but because you might not want them. And the lesson that I think we learned is,
I guess, don't
because
sell your soul,
we didn't
make a good decision. Don't just sell it to
the
very first.
Yeah, don't sell it to the first person. Not that we did, but we had kind of put ourselves into a corner where we were at the point where we needed a publisher because we didn't do enough initial planning. So it was kind of, if we don't get a publisher, we're going to have to end this. And we were in a bad spot. So we needed to find a publisher, which meant that we probably didn't shop as long as we could have. That's not saying that we didn't end up with a good publisher, but I still probably would have liked to have spent more time just testing the waters and seeing what was out there and shopping longer, because I'm that person. I like to,
and it's a lengthy process, by the way.
It's a lengthy process, yeah. If putting together a publishing deal doesn't take months, be wary. If you talk to a publisher and they immediately hand you a contract and they want you to sign and they're ready to go, red flags. Red flags. Like, they're way too eager. And if they're hurrying you, this is for all purchasing decisions. If anybody's ever hurrying you to make a purchase, walk away, because there's something shady happening and you don't want to be part of that. So
and when it comes
definitely
to
shop around.
I'd say the most important thing to think about when it comes to publishers versus other funding methods is that when you work with a publisher, and I guess this kind of goes in a weird way with crowdfunding too. It's a little bit looser with crowdfunding, but when you work with a publisher, most of the time, and not always, but most, like 99% of the time, you are going to need to have a quantifiable way to prove to them that you are working on the game and the game is progressing forward for them to give you the funding. So that is something to keep in mind. The reason I said with crowdfunding it's a bit looser because you are the person who decides what that is. Yeah. And what you show to people to say, hey, I'm working on the game is progressing. Yeah. But when it comes to publishers, more than often, they are the ones that are going to be defining these quantifiable stuff. And
I would say
game development is the most volatile thing in the world.
Yeah.
So
I think we could probably do a whole episode on just how to find a good publisher.
Probably, yeah.
But the gist of it is, it all comes down to your contract. So make sure you have a good lawyer. Which that's been my back of advice for literally every single episode is make sure you get a good lawyer. I should. But it's gonna and that's why the process should take a while, is because you need to make sure that everybody's getting what they want. But of all the things on the list of ways to get money, I would say that having a publisher is going to be the absolute most restrictive, because it's not just taking money from somebody, it's going into business with somebody. So just to clear it up for anybody who doesn't know, because I meet people who don't actually know this. So real quick, what is a publisher? What does a publisher do for you? And do you even need a publisher?
Yeah.
Because oftentimes the answer is no.
Yeah, when you really get down to answer the questions of what they're going to bring to the table, you realize that not many of those are the stuff that you even need to begin with.
Yeah. So what is a publisher? What does a publisher do? A publisher is the middleman between you and the market. Okay? So up until Steam, before Steam existed, the only way that you could sell a video game was to have it pressed onto a disc or into a cartridge and then have that sold in stores, right? Now, you as a developer, unless you have a game cartridge pressing kit at your house, you don't have the means to accomplish that.
Yeah.
A publisher does. They're the ones who have the connections, they're the ones who have the distribution, they're the ones who can get your game actually out into the stores. So that's what a publisher does. It's the same thing in books, and it's the same thing in movies. So in books, a publisher is the person who prints the books and puts it out in the stores. That's what keeps them different from the writer. It's the same thing with music. In music, they're called record labels.
Yeah.
They're the person who prints it into a disc and puts it out there. Now, in the digital age, the need for publishers, for book labels, for giant movie studios are becoming less and less because we as artists are a lot more empowered than we used to be. So you need to really be asking yourself, what do I want from a publisher? Now, can they do the physical release stuff? Yes, they're still going to be able to do that. Most of them. Some of them might just be doing digital publishing. Do you need that? In a lot of cases, yes. Unless you already have contacts and connections at PlayStation and Xbox and Switch, unless you already have the developer accounts, unless you're willing to do that yourself, which you absolutely can, it's just very difficult and can be expensive. Having a publisher who already has all those connections is going to save you a lot of time and energy.
And I will
They're
say,
also going to have... Yeah, go ahead.
I will say that don't think that these things that you have in mind as goals for your game are stuff that needs to happen at the very start, or they all need to come in one package, because you can always kind of spread these over time. What I mean by that is, if you have your game, you can release it yourself on Steam. If you have absolute faith that the game will speak for itself, and with minimum marketing or with some sort of, influencer related marketing, you can get it to sell. At that point, you have a lot of funding. You have a lot of money that came from selling the game. And then when you go to a publisher, it's going to be a very different discussion, because you're not asking for them to fund you, you're just asking them to release it on consoles and whatnot. So you can always kind of spread these goals over time as well, and go with a smaller scope at first and then kind of expand it at the end.
Now, but here's the thing though, if you're looking for funding to make the game, and you don't have the funding to even get your game on Steam, now it's a different conversation, because I might need the publisher just for the money. And if that's the case, then that's what you're going to negotiate for. You would negotiate for, you give me development funds and I release this game on Steam, and that's the end of it. In which case, you'd want to make sure that their publishing deal isn't an exclusive one, and that you can go to other publishers, or that they're willing to do certain things later. So again, get a lawyer who can help you navigate all this stuff, because there's a lot of stuff that a publisher can and will offer, but you need to decide how important those things are to you. And
how soon you need them,
if your goal is just get it on Steam, you might not need a publisher for that.
At that point, you can unless
funding. Just get it on Steam is going to cost you $300,000. If that's the case, you might need a publisher, because they're going to have those larger quantities of money. So there's a lot of things to look at. So if we go back to our little, $14,000 game that we were talking about, it's going to take 3 to 7 months to develop, and we just want to release it on Steam, okay, maybe we don't need to shop for a publisher. Or maybe there's a really small indie publisher out there who is willing to give us that money, and they just want Steam publishing rights, and maybe they want some royalties, and they'll help us market. Cool, But if that game ballooned into, it's going to take us 3 years and $500,000, and okay, now we're going to need a different type of publisher. So there's benefits and there are downsides, and you need to make sure that when you're talking to a publisher, one, that you're getting the things that you need, not just the things that you want, but the things that you need, and 2, you're not giving up more than you're willing to give up. So that's the negotiation process. I think we really should do a whole episode on just like
I think we should.
how to find a good publisher, because there are 2 other avenues to get money that I haven't even gotten to yet. So the next one would really be loans, which aren't the best. They're hard to get. They're dependent on whatever economy you're in. So, getting a loan in the US right now is not a good idea. It would be a business loan, not a personal loan. So that goes back to make sure you have a business set up. So I don't recommend loans.
If you're not sure how to set up a company.
Yeah, I don't recommend it, but it might work for some people. Who knows? The last one is my favorite, which is just do it yourself. Which sounds easy, and it's not. But there are a lot of avenues to do it, and a lot of people do it very successfully. You hear about some people who quit their job and use their investment in 401k, or they use whatever pension they had from their company or whatever, and they take that and they put it into making a game, or they sell their house.
I'll give you a very good example. Sean Murray, the director for No Man's Sky, he sold his house to fund No Man's Sky, and then he got very lucky. Sony picked it up, and then they gave him all the funding that he needed.
So or you could, maybe you work at a job that you hate, but you save up your money for 6 months, and then you use that to fund the game. Or put together a savings plan on how you can put together the money to get it done, and then you can quit your job and whatever. Or maybe not even quit your job at all. Maybe you have a full-time job and you make the game as a hobby on your own time, and you put a little bit of money here and there into hiring other people. Or maybe you are really lucky and you have a partner or a spouse or a girlfriend who will support you, or boyfriend, I guess, who will support you and pay for everything while you develop this game on your own. Am I sort of talking about me?
By the way.
Yes, but I'm also talking about Stardew Valley. That's how Stardew Valley got made.
Yeah.
He had a really supportive partner who supported him, and now we have like one of the biggest farming games in the world. So it's a viable option. The best part about that is it's weirdly probably the least risky. It's the only avenue where the only people you're beholden to, or maybe anybody who helps you out in your personal life, but you're not going to be beholden to publishers. You're not going to be beholden to a crowd for crowdfunding. You're not going to be beholden to some investor group who's looking for a return. So that's a really good way to do it. I think the least risky are going to be kind of the do-it-yourself funding, or the government funding will probably be the ones you have to give up the less for. And then, probably the crowdfunding, and then probably the investment groups, and then the publisher is going to be you're in business with somebody. So, but that's it. That's all the ways to get your game funded.
That is all the
There's
ways.
A lot of them.
We are going to go a bit more into detail about on these each one of these a little bit more in the extended version of the podcast. So if you want to check that out, you can join our Patreon down below and listen to the full extended version of this. And I think
because we also need funding.
We also need funding. That is another way actually.
And Patreon qualifies as crowdfunding. For anybody who's wondering, and we use it, so please fund us.
We're also going to go a bit more into how much a game is going to cost, maybe. Because there's talk about localization and porting and all of that stuff that we can also kind of give our experiences about. So if you want to check that out, do look at our Patreon, and whatever support you give us there goes into our games, just as we've been talking about. For we are just like you, devs. So we do have Discord as well. Feel free to join there. It's currently all about SunnySide, our next upcoming game, our first game. But it's RainyGames, so whatever future project we work on, it'll also be there. So thank you so much for listening to us today. We hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and we'll see you next week where we talk about the current events, hopefully whatever happens in the industry then. Bye.